Let's make this day in history your last day here. The words exploded in the briefing room, like a grenade nobody expected. 20 people sat frozen, their breathing the only sound for half a heartbeat before the laughter started. That hollow, nervous kind that people make when they're too afraid to do anything else. My manager stood at the front, hands on his hips, grin stretched wide like he'd just delivered the punchline of the century. He'd been building up to this moment for 10 minutes, rattling off his little history lesson about famous people who got fired on random dates, making everyone guess where this was going. When he finally pointed at me and delivered his line, 2 people actually clapped. Most just looked down at their notebooks. But the sound of that laughter felt like glass grinding into my chest. He'd rehearsed this, practiced the timing, probably stood in front of his bathroom mirror perfecting that smug expression. And now, here he was, executing his performance, while I sat 3 rows back, hands folded on the workspace in front of me, feeling every eye in the room dart between us. He wanted me to crumble, to tear up, to stammer an excuse and flee. That's what his expression said. That's what his body language screamed. But something strange happened in that moment, something he didn't account for. Instead of breaking, I felt something else entirely, a weird, perfect clarity, because I knew something he didn't. Something nobody in this room knew except me. I stood up, the laughter died faster than it started, walked to the whiteboard, mounted on the wall near the front, my footsteps the only sound now, picked up a blue marker from the tray, and wrote 8 numbers in careful deliberate strokes, 12, 15, 20, 25. 3 weeks from this exact moment, the marker squeaked against the board. I capped it, turned around, looked directly at him. You might want to remember this one. His grin didn't just fade, it disintegrated. His skin went from flushed to pale in the span of 2 seconds, and I watched his throat work as he swallowed. Just for a moment, the power structure in that room completely flipped, and everyone felt it. The air itself seemed to shift. Someone coughed. Another person shifted in their seat, the chair creaking loud enough to make everyone jump. "Sit down," he said, but his voice came out different now, thinner, tighter, like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. I walked back to my spot, sat down, placed my hands in the same position as before. He tried to continue with the briefing, stumbling through his agenda about quarterly targets and process improvements, but his eyes kept flicking to that date on the whiteboard. He didn't erase it, didn't acknowledge it beyond that initial reaction, but it sat there for the entire meeting, 8 blue numbers that nobody could ignore. When the briefing finally ended 40 minutes later and people filed out, I heard whispers. "What was that?" About, "What's December 15th? Did you see his face?" I didn't answer anyone, just gathered my things and left. But as I walked past the whiteboard, I saw him standing there, staring at those numbers like they might rearrange themselves into something less threatening. They wouldn't, and he knew it. Before we go any further, I need to say something. If you're listening to this and it's pulling you in, if you're already wondering what December 15th means and how this whole thing is going to unfold, do me a favor, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me if you've ever worked for someone who made you feel small, and subscribe, because what comes next isn't just about what happened in that briefing room. It's about everything that led there and everything that came after. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Now, let me take you back to where this really started. My name is Sutton, 31 years old, 5'6", brown hair I wear in a ponytail most days, because I don't have time for anything fancier. I drink black coffee, not because I like it, but because adding cream and sugar feels like wasted motion. I've worked in operations management for 9 years, moving between companies every 2 or 3 years, always chasing the next challenge, the next broken system that needs fixing. I'm good at what I do, not in the way people brag about being good. I mean, I can walk into a failing operation, spend a few weeks watching how everything moves, and identify exactly where the breakage points are. I see patterns other people miss. I notice when someone says a deadline is flexible, but their body language says they're panicking. I catch the small lies people tell themselves about why something isn't working, and then I fix it, not with grand announcements or dramatic restructuring plans, just quiet, persistent changes that accumulate until suddenly everything works better and nobody can quite remember when it shifted. The company hired me 6 months before that briefing. I won't tell you the company name because that's not what this is about. What matters is they brought me in specifically to rebuild the operational framework for our division, not assist with rebuilding, not support someone else's vision, rebuild it myself, from foundation to finish. The system had been broken for 2 years. Projects routinely exploded past their deadlines. Clients filed complaints weekly. Money hemorrhaged from every initiative like the budget had been slashed open with a blade. Upper management had tried everything. New software, additional training, motivational consultants who made everyone sit through trust falls and personality assessments. Nothing worked, so they went looking for someone who could diagnose the actual problem and actually solve it. They found me working at a manufacturing firm 3 states away, brought me in for 6 rounds of interviews with different executives, and finally made an offer I couldn't refuse. Director-level pay for an operations lead position, with the promise of promotion if I delivered results. I accepted immediately, gave 2 weeks' notice at my old job, packed up my apartment, drove 18 hours to start fresh in a city where I didn't know anyone. My first day was a Tuesday in June. Hot, humid, the kind of weather that makes your clothes stick to your skin the moment you step outside. I arrived at the building at 7:30, an hour before my scheduled start time, because I wanted to watch people arrive, see who showed up early, who rushed in right at the deadline, who looked energized and who looked beaten down before the day even began. I sat in my car in the parking area for 45 minutes, taking mental notes. Lots of beaten down expressions, very few smiles. People moved like they were walking through water, every step an effort. That told me something important. Whatever was broken here, it was breaking people too. When I finally went inside, I met my manager for the first time. His name was Hal, 47 years old, been with the company for 15 years, worked his way up from an entry position to division manager over a decade and a half. Medium height, thinning hair he combed carefully to cover the bald spot, glasses that were perpetually smudged, and a handshake that lasted 2 seconds too long. He gave me the tour, showed me the workspace areas, the break rooms, the supply closets, introduced me to the team one by one, 23 people total, and I watched their reactions when he said my role was to rebuild operations. Some looked hopeful, most looked skeptical. 2 people looked actively hostile, like my presence was a personal insult. "We're excited to have you," Hal said as we finished the tour. "Really excited. This team needs fresh perspective, new energy, someone who can come in and help us implement the improvements I've been designing." That last part made my spine straighten. The job description said nothing about implementing someone else's designs. It said I'd be diagnosing problems and creating solutions, but I didn't argue. Not on day 1. I just smiled and said I was excited to get started. He assigned me a workspace in the back area, away from everyone else, and left me with a stack of documentation about current processes. I spent the rest of that first day reading through procedures, flowcharts, approval hierarchies. Everything was documented beautifully, color-coded charts, detailed explanations, clear ownership assignments. On paper, this system should have worked perfectly, but I'd been doing this long enough to know that paper doesn't tell the full story. Paper tells you what people want to be true. Reality tells you what actually is. For the first 8 weeks, I barely spoke, just watched. I'd arrive early and stay late, positioning myself where I could observe workflow without being obvious about it. I noticed that every decision, no matter how small, required Hal's approval. Want to order new supplies? Needs Hal's signature. Client requesting a minor timeline adjustment? Needs Hal's review. Team member suggesting a process improvement? Needs Hal's evaluation. Everything funneled through him. And here's the thing that made this system fatal. He never actually approved anything on time. Requests would sit in his inbox for days, sometimes weeks. People would follow up, and he'd say he was still reviewing, still considering, still making sure we got it right. Meanwhile, projects stalled. Clients grew frustrated. The team worked longer hours trying to compensate for delays they couldn't control. I watched a project coordinator named Iris spend 3 days trying to get approval for a scheduling change that would have saved the client $4,000. By the time Hal finally signed off, the window had passed. The client paid the extra cost and filed a complaint. Hal blamed Iris for not flagging it sooner. Iris didn't argue, just took the blame, and went back to her workspace. I started having conversations, quiet ones, usually over lunch or during breaks. I'd sit with someone and ask simple questions. How long have you been here? What do you like about the work? What makes your job harder than it needs to be? People were cautious at first, gave me corporate-approved answers about teamwork and growth opportunities. But after a few weeks, when they realized I wasn't reporting back to Hal, they started telling the truth. He won't let us make any choices, one person told me. Even stuff we've done 100 times. It all has to go through him. I stayed until midnight last week, waiting for approval on something that took him 30 seconds to review, another said. When I asked why it took so long, he said I needed to be more patient. He takes credit for everything good and blames us for everything bad, a third person admitted. Last month, we landed a huge client renewal. He told upper management it was because of his strategic vision. But it was actually because our team worked weekends for a month straight fixing problems he created. I didn't take notes, didn't record anything, just listened and remembered. By week 10, I had a complete map of the dysfunction in my head. Hal had built a system where he controlled everything but was accountable for nothing. He hoarded authority like it was currency but distributed responsibility like it was garbage. And the team, beaten down by 2 years of this, had learned to keep their heads down and survive rather than innovate or push back. Upper management saw only the surface. They knew results were bad, but they didn't know why. Hal fed them explanations about market conditions, difficult clients, team performance issues. He was a master at deflecting blame while positioning himself as the hero trying to save a failing operation. I realized something in those first 10 weeks. Something that changed how I approached everything that came after. The problem wasn't the processes. The problem was Hal. And if I wanted to fix the operation, I had to work around him, not confront him, not report him, not try to change him, just build a better system underneath him, so quietly that by the time he noticed, it would already be working. So I started making changes, tiny ones at first. I'd have a conversation with someone about a decision they needed to make, and instead of telling them to submit it for Hal's approval, I'd ask questions. What would you do if you could choose right now? What's the worst outcome if you make this call yourself? How confident are you in that choice? 9 times out of 10, people knew exactly what needed to happen. They just didn't have permission to act on it. So I started giving them something better than permission. I gave them a framework. Here's what I've noticed. I'd say, on decisions that impact budget by less than $500 and don't change client deliverables, you already know the right answer. What if you just made those choices and documented them afterward? They'd look at me like I'd suggested robbing a bank. But Hal requires approval for everything. Hal requires approval because nobody's ever shown him there's a better way. Make the decision. Document it. If it works out, you've just proven you can handle it. If it doesn't, we'll learn something useful. Either way, the project keeps moving. The first person who tried it was a developer named Cornell. Quiet guy, mid-30s, brilliant at solving technical problems, but terrified of stepping outside established rules. A client needed a minor adjustment to a reporting feature. Normal process meant submitting a request to Hal, waiting 3 to 5 days for approval, then implementing the change. Cornell came to me instead. It's a 2-hour fix, he said. Client needs it by Thursday. If I wait for approval, we'll miss the deadline. Can you do it without breaking anything else? I asked. Absolutely. Then do it. Send Hal an update after it's done, noting that the client had an urgent need, and you handled it to maintain the relationship. Cornell looked terrified and excited at the same time. He made the change. Client was thrilled, sent a personal thank you message that got forwarded to upper management. When Hal saw the update, he called Cornell in. I don't know exactly what was said, but Cornell came out looking relieved. He said, "Good initiative," Cornell told me later. But next time, check with him first. Did he seem actually upset? No, just said it automatically, like he had to say it. That was the crack in the dam. Over the next month, I had similar conversations with 12 different people. Not all at once, never in a group, always one-on-one, casual, framed as exploring possibilities rather than breaking rules. What if you handled routine client communications directly instead of routing them through Hal? What if your team set its own sprint priorities based on client needs? What if we created a shared system for tracking decisions so everyone has visibility without waiting for approval? Each conversation planted a seed. Some grew immediately, others took weeks. But slowly, quietly, the team started operating differently. They made decisions, took ownership, stopped waiting for permission that rarely came, and the results were immediate. Projects that had been stalled for months suddenly moved forward. Clients who'd been furious started sending compliments. Deadlines got met, budgets stopped bleeding. Upper management noticed. I started getting invited to meetings I wasn't technically senior enough to attend. Division heads would ask my opinion on operational questions. The executive team requested a brief update on what was changing and why. I kept my answers simple and never mentioned Hal's bottleneck. The team has a lot of expertise, I'd say. We're just creating space for them to use it. Hal noticed too. That's when everything shifted. At first, he seemed pleased, proud even. The changes I've been implementing are really starting to pay off, he announced in a briefing. I was sitting in the back, listening to him describe improvements I'd designed, and the team had executed as if he'd orchestrated the entire thing. Nobody corrected him. I didn't either. Not yet. But then the comments started. Little digs. Subtle undermining. During a meeting with a division head, Hal interrupted me mid-sentence. Well, some of us actually understand the big picture here. Sutton's still learning how we do things. The division head looked uncomfortable but didn't push back. During a client call, Hal jumped in to clarify a point I'd made, essentially repeating what I'd said but positioning it as correction. What Sutton means, and she's still developing her communication skills, is that we'll have this completed by next week. The client looked confused. I stayed quiet. It got worse. He started assigning me tasks that were clearly beneath my role. Can you compile these reports for me? I need them formatted by tomorrow. Can you sit in on this meeting and take notes? I want detailed documentation. Can you follow up with these 7 people about their project status? I don't have time. I did the work. Every single task he assigned, no matter how menial, I completed perfectly and on time. Because I understood something he didn't. Every time he tried to diminish me, he was actually giving me access. Access to information. Access to relationships. Access to the inner workings of dysfunction he didn't realize I was documenting in my head. When I compiled his reports, I saw which numbers he emphasized and which he buried. When I took notes in his meetings, I heard how he spoke differently to executives versus his team. When I followed up with people about project status, I built relationships with folks across the entire organization. 3 months into my time there, upper management called me to an off-site meeting. Just me. No agenda. Meeting scheduled at a location 15 minutes from the office, at a time when I'd normally be in our weekly team sync. I told Hal I had a personal appointment. He barely looked up from his computer. Fine. Be back by 2. I drove to the address they'd given me, a meeting space attached to a hotel, wondering if I was about to be let go. Maybe someone had complained about the changes I'd been encouraging. Maybe Hal had finally figured out what I was doing and reported me. I walked into the room expecting bad news. Instead, I found 3 executives sitting at a round table with coffee and pastries laid out, like this was a casual conversation rather than my execution. Sutton, thank you for coming, the CEO said. Woman in her mid-50s, sharp eyes, reputation for being tough but fair. We wanted to talk to you about something sensitive. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face neutral. Of course, we've been watching what's happening in your division. The improvements, the client feedback, the team morale shift. It's remarkable. I waited. We need to understand something. Whose idea was the decentralized decision-making framework? I could have lied, could have said it was collaborative, could have deflected. Instead, I told the truth. Mine. The team had the expertise. They just needed permission to use it, without everything bottlenecking through approval chains. The 3 executives exchanged glances. And Hal's role in this? One of them asked. I chose my words carefully. Hal built a system that prioritized control. I built a system that prioritizes velocity. They coexist because the team knows how to navigate both. The CEO leaned forward. Here's why we're really asking. We want to create a new role, Director of Operations. reporting directly to this executive team. Authority over all divisional workflows and reporting structures. Ability to implement the kind of changes you've been making in your division across the entire organization. We want you for that role. I sat there processing what she'd just said. Director level. Reporting to executives. Authority over all divisions, which meant authority over Hal. What's the timeline? I asked. We're planning to announce it December 15th, during the year-end leadership meeting. It's our biggest annual gathering. All division managers, all operational leads, all executives. We want you to present your vision for how operations should work going forward. We'll announce your promotion during that presentation. And Hal? I asked. The CEO's expression didn't change. Your current manager will be transitioned to an individual contributor role. No direct reports, no budget authority, just technical work. It's already approved by this executive team. The decision is final. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Instead, I felt something more complicated. Why not tell him now? Because we need these next 3 months to be normal. We're watching how the division performs under your unofficial leadership. We're documenting results. We're building the case for why this structural change is necessary. If Hal knows what's coming, he'll either sabotage the operation to prove you can't handle it, or he'll try to take credit for everything to save his position. We need clean data. Can you do this? Can you work under him for 3 more months knowing what's coming? I thought about every dig he'd made, every time he'd taken credit for work he didn't do, every team member I'd watched him diminish. Yes, I said, I can do that. One more thing, the CEO said. This stays completely confidential. You can't tell anyone, not the team, not your friends, not family. If this leaks before December 15th, we'll have to reconsider the entire plan. Understood. We shook hands. I drove back to the office, walked into the building, sat down at my workspace, and for the first time in 3 months, I smiled while Hal was talking in a briefing. The next 3 months were the strangest of my professional life. Every morning, I'd wake up knowing I was going to be Hal's boss in a matter of weeks. Every day, I'd show up and let him treat me like I was beneath him. He got bolder, meaner, started making jokes at my expense during briefings. Sutton has a lot of ideas about how things should work, which is cute because she's been here less than a year and I've been doing this for 15. Laughter from people who were too scared not to laugh. Some people think reading a few books about operations makes them experts. Some of us actually learned by doing. More uncomfortable chuckles. I'd sit there, taking notes, keeping my expression neutral. After meetings, team members would approach me quietly. Are you okay? They'd ask. That was harsh. I'm fine, I'd say. He's just stressed about year-end numbers. But I started documenting, not officially, just mental notes about every comment, every slight, every time he claimed credit for someone else's work. The briefing, where he made his history joke, was the culmination. He'd been planning it for days. I'd heard him practicing the cadence in his workspace. This day, in history, pause for effect. Your last day here. Bigger pause for the laugh. He thought it was brilliant. Thought he'd finally found the perfect way to put me in my place in front of everyone. When he actually delivered it that morning, and people actually laughed, something in me crystallized. Not anger, something colder and more focused. I stood up before I consciously decided to move, walked to the whiteboard while the room went silent, wrote the 15th of December 2025 in blue marker, turned around. You might want to remember this one. His face drained of color so fast I thought he might pass out, but he recovered. Tried to. Sit down, he said, voice tight. I did, and I watched him try to continue the briefing while that date sat on the whiteboard behind him. 8 numbers that clearly meant something he couldn't identify. After that briefing, everything changed. Hal started being nice to me. Not genuine nice, desperate nice. Sutton, I'd love your input on this client proposal. Sutton, what do you think about the direction we're taking with the automation project? Sutton, I know I've been hard on you, but it's because I see real potential. During a one-on-one meeting 2 weeks before December 15th, he actually tried to mentor me. You've got talent, he said. Raw talent. With the right guidance, you could really go somewhere in this organization. I'd like to invest more time in developing your skills. I nodded, thanked him, kept working. People started asking me about the date. What's December 15th? What did you do? Why did he look so scared? I didn't answer, just smiled and changed the subject. The mystery made it worse for Hal. He checked the calendar obsessively, asked people if they knew about any scheduled announcements, looked increasingly stressed. 1 week before the date, he called me into his workspace. Door closed. Just the two of us. Whatever you're planning, he said. Whatever you think you know, let's talk about it now. We can work this out. I looked at him with genuine curiosity. I'm not planning anything. Then what's December 15th? The year-end leadership meeting, I said. It's been on the calendar for 6 months. All division managers are required to attend. All operational leads are invited. The executive team is presenting the vision for next year. I watched understanding flicker across his face. He'd forgotten, completely forgotten, about the biggest meeting of the year. Right, he said. Of course. I'll be there. I figured you would be, I said. It should be really interesting. December 15th arrived on a Wednesday. Clear sky, unusually warm for winter, the kind of day where everything feels sharper somehow. I woke up at 5 in the morning without an alarm, adrenaline already flooding my system. Spent an hour going over my presentation one final time. 15 slides, clean visuals, data that told an undeniable story. I'd practiced the delivery 40 times over the past week, timing it perfectly to 14 minutes and 30 seconds. Confident but not arrogant. Visionary but grounded in specifics. I wanted every word to land exactly right. Got dressed carefully. Navy suit, white blouse, low heels that wouldn't click too loudly when I walked to the front of the room. Simple jewelry, hair pulled back neat. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. 6 months ago, I'd been someone else. Someone who worked hard and stayed quiet and hoped good work would speak for itself. Now I was someone who understood that good work needs a voice. And today, I was finally going to use mine. The leadership meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the main hall. I arrived at 8, wanted to feel the space while it was still empty. The hall was huge, easily fit 200 people, with rows of seats arranged theater-style facing a stage area with a podium and a massive display behind it. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness, stood at the front where I'd be standing in 2 hours, looked back at all those empty seats and imagined them filled. Imagined Hal sitting somewhere in the middle, still not knowing what was about to happen. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else, anticipation. The knowledge that I'd worked for this moment longer than he'd ever understand. People started arriving around 9:15. Division managers, operational leads, executives, senior staff from every department. I positioned myself near the back, watching everyone file in. Saw familiar people from my division. Cornell gave me a small wave. Iris smiled. Others nodded as they passed. Then I saw Hal enter, wearing a suit that looked like he'd bought it specifically for this meeting. He scanned the room, spotted me in the back, and his expression flickered through several emotions too quickly to name. He found a seat in the 3rd row, prime location, close enough to be visible to executives, but not so close that he looked desperate. He thought he was untouchable. After 15 years with the company, after surviving restructurings and leadership changes and economic downturns, he believed nothing could shake his position. I could see it in the way he sat, comfortable, confident, safe. The room filled quickly. By 9:50, every seat was occupied and people stood along the walls. This was the biggest turnout in years, someone whispered behind me. Everyone wanted to hear the executive team's vision for the coming year. At exactly 10 o'clock, the CEO walked onto the stage. The room went quiet instantly. She didn't need to ask for attention. Just her presence commanded it. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying easily to the back without a microphone. "Thank you all for being here. This has been a remarkable year for our organization. We've faced significant challenges, market volatility, client demands that pushed us to our limits, internal processes that needed serious examination. But we've also seen extraordinary growth, not just in revenue, though that's up 18%, not just in client retention, though that's at a 5-year high. We've seen growth in how we work, how we think, how we solve problems." She paused, letting her words settle. This year, we've seen remarkable improvement in operational efficiency, particularly in one division: projects completing on time, client satisfaction up 40%, budget adherence. That's been the best in company history. And when we dug into why this was happening, we discovered something important. Someone had completely rebuilt how that division works. Not through top-down mandates, not through expensive consultants, through quiet, persistent innovation that put decision-making power in the hands of people. Closest to the work, I felt every muscle in my body tense. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. Hal shifted in his seat, straightening his spine, getting ready for recognition. I watched him from the back, saw him prepare his humble expression, the one he'd use when the CEO praised his leadership. "We're creating a new position," the CEO continued. "Director of Operations, reporting directly to the executive team. This person will have authority over all divisional workflows and reporting structures. They'll have the autonomy to implement the kind of changes that have worked so well in one division across our entire organization. This is a critical role. We need someone who's proven they can diagnose problems, build trust, and create systems that actually work." The room was absolutely silent. Everyone leaning forward slightly, everyone wondering who was about to be named. "I'd like to introduce you to our first Director of Operations," the CEO said. And then she said my name. Sutton. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. Then heads started turning, scanning the room, looking for me. I walked forward from the back, my heels clicking on the hard floor, and the sound seemed impossibly loud. As I moved down the aisle toward the stage, I passed Hal's row. Didn't look at him. Didn't need to. I could feel his shock radiating outward like heat. The room erupted in applause as I reached the stage. Not polite applause, genuine, enthusiastic applause. I glanced out at the audience and saw people from my division standing. Cornell was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. Iris had tears in her eyes. Even people I barely knew from other divisions were on their feet. The sound was overwhelming, validating, and underneath it all, I heard what it really meant. This wasn't just applause for my promotion. This was applause for every person who'd ever worked for someone like Hal and survived it. I took my place at the podium, waited for the applause to fade, and began my presentation. "Thank you," I said, and my voice came out steady and clear. Over the past 6 months, I've had the opportunity to see this organization from a unique perspective. I've watched incredibly talented people struggle within systems that weren't designed to help them succeed. I've seen brilliant ideas die because they couldn't navigate approval processes. I've watched deadlines get missed not because people didn't work hard enough, but because the structure made velocity impossible. I clicked to my first slide, a simple chart showing project completion rates in my division over the past year. 6 months of decline, then a sharp upward curve, starting exactly when I arrived. This is what happens when you trust people. When you build frameworks that enable decision-making rather than bottlenecking it. When you create accountability without micromanagement. I walked through my vision for 15 minutes. Specific, actionable, changes, metrics for measuring success, timeline for implementation. The executive team nodded. People took notes. I could feel the room's energy shift from polite attention to genuine engagement. They weren't just listening, they were buying in. When I finished and the applause came again, I knew I'd nailed it. I'd proven I deserved this role. Not because someone gave it to me as a favor, because I'd earned it through results nobody could deny. I stepped away from the podium and the CEO returned to the stage. "Thank you, Sutton. That's the kind of thinking we need, leading operations going forward." She paused, her expression shifting slightly. "Now, as Sutton mentioned, creating this new structure requires some organizational changes. We're restructuring several reporting lines to support this new direction. Effective today, several roles will shift from management to individual contributor positions. This isn't a reflection of performance. It's about putting people in roles where they can focus on what they do best." She pulled up a slide listing 4 names, 4 division managers being transitioned to individual contributor roles. Hal's name was third on the list. I watched from the side of the stage as he processed it, saw the exact moment understanding hit. His face went through a sequence of expressions: confusion, disbelief, recognition, horror. He didn't storm out, didn't yell, didn't make a scene, just sat there while people around him shifted uncomfortably, while whispers spread through the rows, while team members he'd spent years diminishing tried not to let their satisfaction show. The CEO continued talking about the rationale behind the restructuring, about how it would improve organizational efficiency, about transition plans and support structures, but I barely heard her. I was watching Hal, watching him understand that the date I'd written on the whiteboard wasn't a threat. It was an invitation to show up, to be present, to witness the moment when everything he'd built through intimidation and credit theft and systematic diminishment dissolved. He'd asked me to remember dates in history. I'd given him one he'd never forget. The meeting concluded 20 minutes later. People filed out slowly, clustering in groups, talking in hushed tones about the announcements. Several people approached me immediately. Division heads I'd been quietly building relationships with for months, congratulating me, asking about next steps. Team members from my division, some of them openly crying, thanking me for what I'd done. "You changed everything," Iris said, gripping my hand. "You made it possible to actually do our jobs." Cornell just nodded at me, but his expression said more than words could. Then I saw Hal approaching through the crowd. People moved aside to let him pass, creating a path between us. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to speak privately, but not so close it felt aggressive. "You planned this," he said. His voice was flat, empty. "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "I didn't plan this. I just did my job. You kept telling everyone you'd made all these improvements. Upper management wanted to reward whoever was actually responsible. They investigated. They found the right person. You manipulated the team," he said. "You went behind my back. I taught people they could make decisions. That's not manipulation. That's trust. You made me look incompetent." I paused before answering, choosing my words carefully. "I didn't make you look like anything. Your system did that. You built a structure where nothing could move without your approval. Then you didn't approve things. Projects failed. Clients left. The team burned out. I just showed there was a better way." He opened his mouth, closed it. His hands were clenched at his sides, shaking slightly. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me, but he didn't. Just stood there, a man watching his entire professional identity crumble. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "You have a role," I said. "Individual contributor. Technical work. You're good at the technical stuff, Hal. You always were. It's the management part you struggled with. Maybe this is better. For everyone. Including you." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "Including me." He nodded slowly, turned, and walked away. I watched him leave the hall, shoulders hunched, moving like someone who'd aged a decade in an hour. Part of me felt bad for him. A small part. The part that understood he'd probably never wanted to be a manager who diminished people. He'd just gotten scared somewhere along the way. Scared of losing control. Scared of being irrelevant. Scared of admitting he didn't have all the answers. And that fear had turned him into someone who hurt people to feel powerful. But the larger part of me felt something else. Relief. Vindication. And underneath it all, a fierce, burning satisfaction that I'd proven what was possible. When you stop asking for permission and start creating change. The rest of that day blurred together. More congratulations. Meetings with the executive team about transition plans. Conversations with division managers who had 1,000 questions about how the new structure would work. By 6 o'clock, I was exhausted in a way I'd never been before. Not physically tired, emotionally drained. I drove home in silence, parked in my apartment lot, and sat in my vehicle for 20 minutes, just breathing. I'd done it, actually done it. The person who'd tried to humiliate me in front of 20 people was now reporting to someone else while I had a director title and authority over the entire organization's operations. It should have felt like pure victory. But it felt more complicated than that, because this wasn't really about Hal. It never had been. It was about everyone who'd ever been made to feel small by someone with power. Everyone who'd had their work stolen and their ideas dismissed. Everyone who'd sat in briefings and taken insults because they needed their jobs. I'd won for them too. And that weight felt heavier than any promotion. Thank you for sticking with this story all the way to the end. If this resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for recognition in a place that tried to keep you down, leave a comment, tell me about it, and subscribe, because sometimes the best outcome isn't destroying someone who hurt you. Sometimes it's building something so undeniably good that their destruction becomes irrelevant. The next morning, I showed up for my first day as Director of Operations. New workspace on the executive floor, new title on my email signature, new authority that felt both thrilling and terrifying. But the first thing I did wasn't strategic, wasn't political. I walked down to my old division and gathered the team. I need you to know something, I told them. What happened yesterday wasn't about revenge. It was about results. You did the work. You took the risks. You trusted a new system when you had every reason not to. This promotion is yours as much as mine. And I promise you, I will never forget that. They worked harder that day than I'd ever seen. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. That's what happens when people feel valued. When they have a leader who protects them instead of diminishing them. When they know their contributions actually matter. As for Hal, he showed up that morning too. Took his new individual contributor role, set up at a different workspace, reported to a manager who was young enough to be his daughter. I saw him in the hallway once. We made eye contact. He looked away first, and I realized something important. I didn't need him to apologize, didn't need him to acknowledge what he'd done, didn't need closure, or confrontation, or dramatic final words. I just needed him to stop having power over people who deserved better. Mission accomplished.